I live with my wife in a two-story home, a house we've called home for almost 5 years. However, something terrifying happened that I will never forget. It all started one evening, just like any other. We'd both been working, and after a normal day, we came home and settled in. After a few hours, when it was time to go to bed, we both headed upstairs to our bedroom. Just as I was getting into bed, my wife realized she had forgotten something downstairs. I don't recall what it was, but she told me she would be right back. At this point, all the lights were off in the house. A minute passed, and then I heard her running up the stairs, breathless and frantic. She burst into the room, panic written all over her face, and said she thought she saw a man standing in the kitchen. I didn't believe her at first. It was too dark to see anything clearly, and she hadn't turned on any of the lights. Maybe it was just her imagination, I thought. But something about the way she looked at me told me she wasn't lying. I reluctantly agreed to go downstairs and check it out. I walked down the hall, down the stairs, and into the kitchen. It was pitch black, but I didn't turn on any lights. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, but when I got to the kitchen, I didn't see anyone. I thought maybe she had been mistaken, but then I heard something, faint at first, a noise coming from the basement. There was a door in the kitchen that led down to the basement. It was closed, but I thought I could hear something coming from behind it. I turned on a light. There was no one in the kitchen, but I thought I could hear movement coming from downstairs. My heart began to race. Slowly, I walked toward the basement door, a feeling of dread settling over me. I opened it and stepped into the basement. I turned on the dim light at the bottom of the stairs. It barely illuminated the space, but there was no one there. I called out, my voice echoing through the darkness. Nothing. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs. Halfway down, I froze. I heard a noise. It wasn't coming from the basement, but from under the stairs. Something or someone was hiding there. My heart pounded in my chest. Without thinking, I rushed back upstairs, slammed the basement door shut behind me, and grabbed my phone. I called the police, barely able to speak. I ran back upstairs to my wife, locked the bedroom door, and we waited in silence, trembling in fear. After what felt like hours, the police arrived. They searched the basement and found a man hiding under the stairs, just as I had suspected. What terrified me the most wasn't that he was there, it was how he had gotten in. We hadn't seen any sign of forced entry, and we never used the basement. He could have entered through an unlocked door, or worse, he could have been there the whole time. The scariest part? We didn't know when he'd slipped in. We never figured out how he'd been hiding there without us noticing, and I still can't shake the thought that this might not have been the first time he'd done it. I was 14 years old, living in a small suburban home with my family. One evening, my friend Dante came over to hang out. We were both sitting in the basement, playing video games, as we often did. The basement was always the best place for us to play, away from everyone else. But that night, something felt different. The house was eerily quiet, with the usual sound of my parents and older sister not being around. It was just Dante and me, but there was an unsettling silence. After a while, we heard a strange noise coming from upstairs. It was subtle at first, like the sound of footsteps, but it didn't feel right. I turned to Dante, asking if he had heard it too. He nodded, looking just as confused as I felt. We had a cat, but the noise didn't sound like a cat at all. It was too heavy, too deliberate, like a person walking. We stopped playing and listened carefully. The footsteps grew louder, as if someone was walking from one side of the house to the other. I felt my heart racing, my stomach churning. We both got up at the same time, deciding to check what was going on. We cautiously walked over to the spare bedroom, locking ourselves in. The door clicked shut, and for a moment, we felt safe, but the silence outside was unnerving. We could still hear the faint sound of footsteps. Someone was downstairs. Then, without warning, the footsteps came closer. It sounded like someone was heading straight toward the basement. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. Dante and I stood completely still, holding our breath. The sound of footsteps was unmistakable now. Someone was coming down the stairs. We stayed silent, frozen in fear. We could hear them walking around the main room, and then, to our horror, they began walking closer to the bedroom door. The floorboards creaked with each step, as if whoever it was intentionally trying to make us hear them. My mind raced. Who could it be? The footsteps paused outside our door, and for a split second, I thought they were going to open it. But then, just as quickly as the noise began, it stopped. The footsteps receded, slowly going back up the stairs. Dante and I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I could feel the sweat pooling on my palms, as I desperately tried to make sense of what just happened. We knew we had to call the police. I didn't have a phone, but Dante did, and he quickly dialed 911. His voice trembled as he explained that we thought someone had broken into the house. The dispatcher stayed on the line with us, listening to every noise. We waited, each second feeling like an eternity. Every creak of the house made us jump. Every shift in the air made us tense. About 5 minutes later, which felt like hours, the police arrived. They quickly entered the house and searched the area, moving through the upstairs rooms. And then, they found him. The man had been hiding in the attic. He must have been up there for a while, watching us from the shadows, waiting for the right moment. He had no explanation for why he was there. Just a vague story about getting lost and thinking it was his friend's house. But I didn't buy it for a second. The police arrested him and cleared the house. But the damage was done. The man had been in our home, watching us, stalking us, and we never knew. I still don't know if he was planning something far worse or if he had been watching us for weeks. That night, Dante and I didn't sleep. We stayed up, talking quietly, too scared to even leave the room. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that someone had been watching us for far longer than we realized. I wonder if there was more to it, more to that man's story, and if he had been in that house before. The fear of knowing that someone was right there just a few feet away haunts me to this day. I've never been the type to get easily spooked, but this one incident still gives me chills to this day. It happened during the summer, when I was 16, living in a small house with my family. My parents were out for the night, and my older sister had gone to stay over at a friend's house. I was home alone and had the whole place to myself, which I thought was going to be a relaxing evening. That night, around 11 p.m., I was lounging in the living room, watching TV. It had been a quiet evening, nothing unusual. But then, I started hearing a faint noise coming from the back of the house. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but it quickly grew louder, like footsteps, heavy and slow, coming from somewhere upstairs. I froze. I knew nobody was home, so my mind immediately went into overdrive. Was it the wind? Was I just imagining things? I sat perfectly still, holding my breath, listening intently. The footsteps continued, and I could swear they were getting closer. They were unmistakably coming from upstairs. I felt my heart racing in my chest as I realized someone was walking around in the house. I told myself it must be the house creaking or maybe even a burglar, but I couldn't bring myself to check. The noise kept getting louder, like someone was walking toward the stairs. Suddenly, I heard the distinct sound of a door creaking open upstairs. My stomach turned into knots. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be quiet. They wanted me to know they were there. I grabbed my phone in a panic and tried to text my parents, but my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely type. Then, the worst thing happened. I heard the footsteps coming down the stairs, slowly, deliberately. I could hear every step as if they were right outside the door. I knew I had to get out of the house, but I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the floor. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs, and I could hear a faint sound coming from behind the wall, like someone was breathing. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come out. And then, through the silence, I heard a voice, a low, gravelly voice, barely a whisper, saying, "I know you're here." At that moment, I bolted. I grabbed my keys, ran out the door, and sprinted to the neighbor's house, barely able to breathe from the sheer terror. I knocked frantically, and they let me in. But I couldn't bring myself to go back inside until the police arrived. When the police searched the house, they found nothing. No one. No signs of forced entry, nothing. But the weirdest part? They found my bedroom window open. I had locked it before leaving, but it was wide open when I returned. I never saw who or what was in the house that night, but the feeling of being watched, of hearing someone breathe on the other side of the wall, still haunts me to this day. I never stayed home alone after that. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when I decided to take a break from work and step outside for a bit of fresh air. I had just moved into this small house on the outskirts of town and was still getting used to the area. The neighborhood was fairly quiet, but the isolation of the house always gave me an unsettling feeling. Something about the way the trees loomed in the distance, or the empty roads stretching out ahead, made me uneasy. As I sat on the porch, staring at the dusk sky, I heard a faint knock on the door. I hesitated. Who could it be at this hour? I didn't know many people in town, and the only ones I did know had made plans earlier that day. Curiosity got the best of me, so I stood up and walked to the door. When I opened it, there was a man standing on the porch. His face was partially obscured by a worn-out hood, and his eyes were wide, unnaturally so. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice shaky, but trying to remain calm. He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at me with this strange, unsettling intensity. His mouth twitched as if he was about to speak but didn't. I stood there, waiting for him to say something, but instead, he just reached out and handed me a small, crumpled piece of paper. Before I could react, he turned and walked away without a word, vanishing into the darkening yard. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. My heart raced in my chest as I looked down at the paper. I unfolded it, my fingers trembling, and the message inside made my blood run cold. It read, "Don't go downstairs." Confused and terrified, I glanced around the porch, but the man was gone. I quickly closed the door, locked it, and stood there for a long time, trying to gather my thoughts. Who was that man? Why did he leave such a strange message? My mind raced as I debated whether or not to follow his warning. I had always been the type of person to brush off superstitions and fear, But this felt different. Something about it felt too real, too urgent. I walked to the hallway, but the idea of going downstairs made my stomach twist. The basement. I had never liked it, but I hadn't given it much thought since moving in. I told myself there was no way. Something could be down there, but the message kept echoing in my mind. Don't go downstairs. But what if the message wasn't just a warning? What if there was something waiting down there? A creeping terror began to settle in my bones as I debated what to do. Against my better judgment, I decided to check. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild. I slowly walked toward the basement door, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. As I opened the door, the temperature dropped drastically, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The stairs led down into complete darkness, and I could hear the faint sound of something scratching, like nails on wood. A wave of panic flooded through me, and I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I slammed it shut and ran back into the living room, grabbing my phone to call someone. I dialed the police, but when I went to speak, I realized my voice was barely a whisper. I hung up and checked the locks on all the windows and doors. Nothing felt right. The night dragged on, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every little sound creaks in the floor. A faint breeze set my nerves on edge. I sat in the living room, waiting for the dawn, terrified that whatever was in the basement was closer than I realized. The next morning, I gathered the courage to call a friend to come over. When they arrived, I reluctantly told them what happened. Together, we went downstairs to check, but when we opened the basement door, it was empty. Nothing had been moved. The room was just as I had left it, dusty and forgotten. But as we walked back up the stairs, I glanced at the door one last time. The faintest scratch marks, barely noticeable, ran along the wooden frame of the basement door. I didn't sleep for days after that, and every time I pass the basement door now, I can't shake the feeling that something or someone is waiting for me to make the wrong move. I had just moved into a quiet neighborhood, looking for a fresh start after some personal struggles. The house was old, but cozy, just what I needed. It was a small two-bedroom with a big backyard, tucked away in the suburbs. The house had been empty for years, which I thought was a steal, but there was something off about the place, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. One evening, I was at home alone, sorting through boxes, trying to get everything settled. My roommate had gone out for the evening, leaving me in the house by myself. I wasn't scared until I started hearing noises. First, it was just the usual creaks of an old house settling. But then, I began hearing something else, something more distinct. It was the sound of footsteps upstairs. I paused, confused. The place was supposed to be empty. My roommate was out, and I hadn't seen anyone else around. I told myself I was just imagining things, and went back to unpacking. But the footsteps continued, slow, deliberate, as if someone was pacing up there. My heart began to race. I told myself it was nothing, but the noises grew louder, closer. I grabbed a flashlight, and made my way to the stairs, my footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the railing and slowly crept up the steps. The sound seemed to come from the hallway at the top, just outside the bedroom. When I reached the top, the house fell eerily silent. I called out, but there was no response. I hesitated, then slowly walked toward the hallway, flashlight trembling in my hand. As I reached the door to my roommate's room, the air grew thick, heavy. My breath hitched in my chest as I turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I was about to turn and leave, I saw something in the corner of my eye. A figure, pale, thin, and gaunt, stood motionless by the window, its back to me. I froze, my stomach dropping. I tried to call out, but no sound came from my throat. I backed away, but as I did, the figure turned around, and I saw its face. Its eyes were wide open, hollow and dark, as if there was nothing behind them but emptiness. It opened its mouth in a silent scream, but no sound came out. I turned and bolted down the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I ran to the front door and tried to open it, but it was stuck, as if something on the other side was holding it shut. Panic surged through me. I looked around, my eyes scanning the room for anything, any way out. Then I heard a noise behind me, a shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet. I turned around, and there, standing in the doorway, was the figure again, closer this time. Its mouth stretched into a twisted grin, and it stepped forward, one agonizing foot at a time. The flashlight flickered, then went out completely, leaving me in total darkness. I fumbled for my phone, trying to use the flashlight, but my hands were slick with sweat, and my fingers wouldn't cooperate. Then, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I screamed and spun around, but there was nothing there. Nothing except the growing darkness, and the feeling of something watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I never stayed in that house again. The police never found anything, no signs of forced entry or anyone in the house. They chalked it up to a case of misunderstanding, but I know what I saw. The figure, whatever it was real. After that night, I moved out. The house is still there, still empty, and every time I drive by, I can't help but glance at the windows, half expecting to see that dark figure staring back at me from the inside.